And tonight's talk is Mobile Dev Quick Talks. So we have 4 or 5 people that are going to do maybe about 10 minutes each on a topic related to mobile development. So I volunteered to go first, so without further ado, me. So let's see. So anyone that, if you know me, you know that I'm really into Go, the programming language. If you look at the stickers on my laptop, or if you look at the books that I read, or the channel I'm always advocating, I'm really into this language Go, which is a server-side language. It's intended for, like the back end of different like web applications, or it's really good for making servers. It's really good at making like command line tools or different kind of like programs that you would just run like on a server typically, or maybe on like a desktop computer. And there's been an experimental, there's been this experiment going on for a while to use Go to create mobile apps, Android and iOS apps. I have had a little bit of experience with Brian. We've been working on a few things recently, so I just kind of wanted to share them with you because I thought they were pretty neat. So if you're interested in it, the way you get to it, so you probably can't see that from back there, but if you search for Go Mobile, like all one word, you'll probably get onto this website here on GitHub. And the first thing I want to say is this is all experimental. This is not necessarily like something I would want to like base a company on. This is an experimental thing, right? Okay, now that's out of the way. There is a, oh, what is it? Let's see. Mobile article. No, let's see. It's in mobile article. Just the thing? No. Sorry, I'm super prepared. There we go. The idea and like the benefit by why you might want to use Go for writing like an Android or iOS application, it's the same kind of idea behind why we have like Cordova for JavaScript, where you can like write JavaScript, HTML things and make Android apps. Same with like C# and Xamarin, so you can, these are the languages I know, and I want to like make an application using that language, but then have it, I don't have to rewrite it for Android, I don't have to rewrite it for iOS. We can just write it once and kind of compile it for both. And that is an option with Go. They have the ability to build all Go applications that create, like, we call them like native, like, I guess you call them like native Go applications. And that's pretty cool. It's kind of limited, and it's mostly oriented around games. And I'll show you a couple examples of those. The other more like business-oriented idea is that you can build libraries written in Go, where you can like leverage the strength of Go or leverage existing Go libraries, and then you can create bindings in Java or Objective-C, and then your Android app can just import those Java bindings and call that code. And so like there's this diagram, this article talks about, gives a, not that one. Oh, this is not the right article. They changed it. No, I guess it's still fine. Basically, the idea is that what you might do is you could, if you had a mobile client and you had a server for your application, maybe that server's written in Go, it doesn't have to be. And then you can write all of the business logic for your application in Go, for your mobile application, that talks to that server and makes those calls and does all of the authentication and unmarshalling and does all that stuff. And then you just use Swift or Objective-C for iOS or Java for Android kind of as like the UI layer of your application. You just use them for the the visible parts that kind of put it all together. But anyway, let me stop talking for a minute and show you some examples. So okay, let's minimize this. That's gonna matter. So first I have over there with the tablets and the headphones watching YouTube Kids. Those are my two kids, Kel and Carter. And when we go to bed every night, we take turns. Whose day is it? They would always ask me, meaning like who gets to pick the first bedtime book, whether like Kel wants his book read first or Carter wants his read first. And we always try to figure it out. And we try to come up with these like complicated calendar systems, and it was just too complicated. And so I was like, we need to write an app for this. So I also wanted to experiment to play around with Go Mobile. So I actually didn't write most of this. I just took an existing application from their examples and ported it to my needs. But this is all of the code for my application. I have one file, main.go. That's where like all of my code is. It's not very big. And then I have a test file that I needed to test something. And then in the assets folder, I have a carter.jpg and kel.jpg. And so all I want to know from this application is when I open it, I want to know, is it Kel's day or Carter's day? And it just goes back and forth. It's really easy to remember. I just picked some date to be like my base. So what's kind of cool about Go Mobile is that you can also kind of build it for the desktop. So normally, if I were to build a Go application, I could just say like Go build. And okay, so it's been built, and so now we have this binary here. So this is my execute it. It launches it kind of in like a desktop app. So there's a picture of Kel, and it's just going to kind of bounce around the screen until I turn it off. There we go. Cool, really awesome, right? If I wanted to build it for Android, instead of saying Go build, I say Go Mobile build. And now I've got this APK, which I can take and install on my phone. But installing, I don't want to have to actually install it on my phone myself. What's happening? Well, it's weird. Going to sleep because my keyboard stopped working. This happened to me the other day. Anyone have any experience with making keyboards start working again? Is there a button on a Mac that's like disables your keyboard? Okay, well, thanks for coming out. I guess we're done. Like, oh, there we go. Okay, it's working again. Okay, so similarly to just regular Go, if you do, instead of doing Go build, if you do Go install, instead of creating the binary in this folder, it'll create it in a particular predefined path. I can do Go mobile install, and if my phone was connected, then with a USB cord, then it would build the APK and push it out and install it on my phone. And just so you can tell that I'm not lying, or this is a very carefully crafted lie, here I have running on my phone. So that's native apps. Kind of the downside is that everything is in like OpenGL, like you would use for like video games. So like there's not a lot of stuff. It's not great for like forms and like a text-heavy app. But if you're making like a game, there's a lot of stuff built around that. I wanted to show some more applications, but I think I'm running out of time, so I'm going to just move on to the next thing real quick. Let's see. I mentioned Brian and I had worked together on a project. Actually, it was like maybe a month ago now, a few weeks. We worked on a weekend hackathon for the Gopher Gala, similar to like the Node Knockout or the Ruby Rumble. It's like a global hackathon kind of thing. We register as your team and then do something with it. And we created this system called Magpie. The idea, just to give you a quick, very like the elevator speech. There's oftentimes when I want to browse for torrents to download, but I don't want to either do that from work, like on my work's network, or I don't want to be subjected to all of the not safe for work ads and things that are prevalent on torrent websites. Or I want to maybe search multiple websites and like aggregate those together, and I'm just looking for this one thing. And I also want to be able to do it from my phone. So what we did is we came up with a Go server, this Magpie server, and a Go mobile Android client so that I can kind of do this. So here's our little Margot, the Magpie mascot. Yeah, thank you, Jim Rice, for that. And so this is just like a GIF of me doing it. So here I'm going to install and run the Magpie server. So here's me fetching it. What's going to happen, down here I have like a watch going where it's just listing this folder for torrent files. And over here on the right I have the Android app that we had created. I have it running on my phone, and I have this application going to like mirror the screen. Here, so now I'm running the Magpie server, and there we go. So you put in the configuration, the URL and password. I can search for my terms here, and when I click go, there we go. So now you can see it made a request to say, give me all torrents for the query Ubuntu. And it's put them all together and shown them to me in like aggregated results. And I could say, okay, go ahead and download that one. And so then it did. It downloaded that file and it put it right here. So I thought that was pretty cool. The structure for this, the way that we use Go Mobile for this project, in the Go code, we created a client that has methods like search and download that know how to talk to our Magpie Go server, and then we created in Android, we put in together like the appropriate Gradle build stuff to say use Go bind, which is the Go Mobile bind plugin, to import this Go package and create like an object that we can use. And then here, this is just Java code in mostly here. So under be like app source in main, yeah, yes. Right, so like in main activity, I think. So we have like new clients. Right, so here we're importing like this identifier here, Magpie, that's the binding, so it's generated from Go. So this is Java code, and we're talking to Go code here to create a client and then call this search method on it. So it's not really complicated what we did, but it was just kind of a neat experiment to be able to do both of those things. But that's it for me. If anyone is interested, there's more examples I can show you maybe after the presentation. But otherwise, I will pass it off to the next presenter. Ryan, you want to go? Let me make sure this is still working. Well, it looks like it's still working. Okay.
All right.
All right, everyone's staff editor.
Woo!
One of the cool things about doing it that way is like when we did that Magpie project, is that then after the weekend was over, we could go in and we built just a command line interface to do the searches and all that. So it was really easy to reuse that code for more applications. So I'm a fan of it after that weekend.
All right. So I'm also incredibly prepared. And what I'm going to talk about tonight is a mobile application framework called Ionic. Has anybody here heard of Ionic? Ooh, a few hands. Awesome. Actually, like decent amount of hands. Awesome. So Ionic is a framework that pulls together several different tools to make it pretty easy to build mobile applications. So the main framework that it's, or the main tool that it's built on top of is a tool called Cordova, which Cordova is open source. And then Adobe came along and decided, well, we're going to take this open source thing and give it a different name and say that we did it. And so they called it PhoneGap. So PhoneGap and Cordova are essentially the same thing. The only difference is that PhoneGap has a suite of tools built around it that Adobe is eventually going to start probably charging some money for, because that's what Adobe does. But what Cordova and PhoneGap allow you to do is to take front-end web applications, so a bundle of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and then turn it into a mobile application. So it'll bundle it in either Java code or Swift or Objective-C so that it can run as a native app on either an iOS platform or an Android platform. So who here knows at least HTML and CSS and maybe JavaScript as well? So you take those skills, bundle it with Cordova or PhoneGap or Ionic, and you can build mobile apps. So that's the intention of it, is to lower the bar that it takes to get into mobile application development, and also allow you to transfer your front-end web skills into mobile application development. So obviously there's some trade-offs. If you're doing anything that's really, really performance intensive, Ionic, Cordova isn't going to handle it nearly as well as doing an actual native mobile application would. But point being, you can still get the job done and launch something. So what's the difference between Cordova and PhoneGap and Ionic? What Ionic does is it takes Cordova and bundles it with a couple other tools. So the main thing is, and let's see here. Doesn't say it directly here, but oh, yay. HDMI cords are great. So AngularJS, has anybody heard of the JavaScript framework called AngularJS? Yes, it's pretty popular these days. So what Ionic has done is taken Angular and Cordova, as well as its own CSS framework that's centered on mobile design, and bundled this all together to make it really quick and easy to build mobile applications. So you're using Angular as the core of your logic. But it has a lot of components built in already that you can pull in to do typical, and forgive me because I haven't done a lot of mobile development, really not any. But you can do things like tab views. So you just pull in an Angular directive, which is just kind of like a component. And then all of a sudden you have your general mobile tab layout within your application. So it gives you a lot of these pre-built things that allow you to develop these things rapidly. So I've done quite a few Ionic projects. And again, for something simple and for something that's not performance intensive, it's absolutely a great answer. A lot of people also like to use it for just rapid application development, or rapid prototype development, I mean. So you might not have your final product built in Ionic, but you can do your proof of concept really quickly so that you can see, is this something that we want to pursue with or move forward with? And yeah, so let's see here. Jacob told me he had the Ionic. Let's just go back several directories here and explore Jacob's computer a little bit. All right, so to get started with Ionic, you install the command line utility. So we'll go back here. This was the getting started page here. And for anybody who can't read this tiny text in the URL bar, it's ionicframework.com. They've got really great documentation. So, but in the getting started page, it's all built on top of Node.js. So if you have Node installed, then you also have npm, which is the Node package manager. So you start by just running this npm install -g Cordova and Ionic. So you install the Cordova framework, and then you also install Ionic, and it gives you everything you need to get going. So if you run Ionic, once you have that installed, if you run Ionic, it should give you this list of commands. So here's all of the things. Oh man, what's your, where'd Jacob go? He's gone. What's, yeah.
It's Alt O.
Alt O, okay. Here we go. Okay, so these are all of the commands that are available from the Ionic command line utility. So we have start. So if you want to create a new Ionic project, you just run Ionic start and give it a folder path, and it will generate all of the base project structure that you need to get started with. Once you have that up and you've done some work, you can run Ionic serve, and that will allow you to run a test server so that you can view it in your browser and see what is, what am I building so far. You can also do run. So if you do Ionic run, it will, actually I think it, yeah, emulate. So if you do Ionic run and you have an iPhone or an Android device connected via USB to your computer, it will identify that and it will then bundle up the app and run it on your device. So you can actually see that while you're building it. It's really, really quick and easy to get started with. If you have the iOS or the Android emulators installed on your computer, you can also just say Ionic emulate platform, and then it will launch the respective emulator, and then you can see it running within that as well. So, as you can see here, it just makes it really, really easy to get started with mobile development. I will say, for people who do real mobile development, they're not always fans of Ionic because, again, there are some drawbacks. Performance is really the biggest one. If you're doing anything that involves image manipulation, video manipulation, things like that, you're going to see some serious performance drawbacks if you're using Ionic. Essentially, what it's doing is creating an app that just has an embedded web page within the app itself. So it's not really a native app, it's just bundled within a native app. So I don't want to oversell this too much, but it's a really easy way to get into mobile development and to use your existing web development skills to at least accomplish something. So I've had a lot of fun with it. Cordova also has a huge variety of plugins that allow you to actually tap into your phone or your device's different hardware capabilities. So things like GPS, the accelerometer, the camera, things like that. So all the stuff that you typically wouldn't be able to do with just a web page, there are Cordova plugins that allow you to tap into that and use it still. So what it's able to accomplish, given how it's doing it, is pretty incredible. And there's a pretty big team of people. Cordova comes from the Apache Foundation, so if anybody's familiar with just the Apache web server, there's a lot of really smart people behind this project, and they're constantly trying to push the boundaries of what they can accomplish with this approach to mobile development. So yeah, it's definitely something to keep your eye on. And in the meantime, while you're learning native development, because that's still definitely a good thing to do, this is a good way to get into mobile development and to do it very quickly. Yes?
There's a question inside. Can Ionic hook into GPS sliding accelerometer?
Yes, absolutely. And that was one of I haven't personally hooked into the accelerometer, but that's one of the examples they give, is that they show it using the accelerometer directly. I've built a couple applications that hook into GPS, and it's really, really easy. In fact, just to plug Open Wichita a little bit here, there's an Open Wichita project that involves connecting panhandlers in Wichita to service providers such as United Way, Lord's Diner, et cetera, et cetera. And the client for this application is actually built with Ionic. If you're interested in getting in on this, you could definitely use some contributors. So yeah, I'll just leave that at that. But this actually uses the GPS module as well. So let's see here. So basically, you install an Ionic Cordova geolocation plugin, and then you just pull this into your Angular controller via Cordova geolocation. I call this and say get current position. I enable high accuracy, and then it gives me my position. And all of a sudden, I have position.coords.latitude and position.coords.longitude. It's as easy as that. So, so yeah, it's really straightforward, really easy to get into. And questions?
So Angular knowledge, essential, highly recommended,
Yes,
optional?
highly recommended. Because that's how you're going to be structuring the logic of your program. So yes, definitely recommended. If you don't want to use Angular, you can still use just Cordova or PhoneGap, and then you can build your front-end web application with whatever tools you want. Ionic gives you a lot of pre-built Angular components that are aimed at mobile interfaces, and handles all the touch events and things like that. So it streamlines it a little bit. Right. So also, I don't think I'm supposed to be doing questions since these are lightning talks. So if you're interested in learning more about Ionic, I'm happy to talk about it. And that's my talk.
Before our next speaker gets going, I'm going to enable our next speaker. So let me do something real quick. I want to add a person. No, is there a way to add a person to an existing Hangout that on air?
There is. There should be an invite button somewhere.
That's what I would think. We got draw, Slack, controller and cameraman, Q&A. I think you had to do it before you started.
That's crazy. It's not, yeah, it wouldn't be any more apps.
Invite.
No.
Just a minute, hon. I guess. All right, I'll look into it. Brian will go ahead and have you just go ahead, and then I'll figure that out next.
Yeah, well, zoom in. Command plus.
Let's see. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah, we'll go with that. So I'm going to talk about Android a little bit. Great. I've been working in Android for, I don't know, since Froyo, so several years now. Have several applications that are on the marketplace, and whenever anyone asks me, I always tell them that I prefer doing native Android. These fancy frameworks like Ionic and all that are whatever, great for getting something out the door, but I'm just the old curmudgeon guy that doesn't like that. So native Android is Java. Fantastic. But I'm not going to talk about that because Java is one of the most popular languages in the world. You can find tutorials for that anywhere. If you really want to learn that, you can go do it. Instead, I'm going to talk about just several of the different parts of the platform of Android, the OS, all that stuff that I really like about it. I feel like if I'm going to do a talk about something, it might as well be the parts of it that I'm excited about anyway. Why is this having so much trouble? So, and also some of the parts of Android that sort of tripped me up as I was learning it, right? So every Android application, when you're building it natively in Android Studio or whatever, has this Android manifest file that you go into, you declare everything that the operating system needs to know about your application, right? So all that different activities that are gonna launch, the permissions that it uses, the intents that it has, which I'll get into that. And so this is kind of one of the things that when you start working in Android, you're like, why do I have to do this? This just seems like I'm throwing stuff into a file. Why can't it figure it all out from the code that I'm writing? But once you kind of realize what happens here and how this works with the operating system and makes Android work, then you're like, all right, that's cool. And I'm to the point now where I wish that applications I wrote for Windows or Mac or Linux or anything had this idea in it, right? Because first of all, the permissions, they're how you, that's how you, on Android, if you've used that, you know, you get the pop-ups that say, do you want to allow this to access your, I guess if you're in the newer version of Android, if you're in 6, it does it at runtime. But in earlier versions, when you're installing it, it'd pop up and say, these are the permissions that this application is requesting, yes or no. And this is where you define all those, right? So for this example that I have here, it's just saying I need to use the internet, which requires both the internet and the access network state permission, right? But this is where you would also define things like I want access to contacts, I want to be able to use the phone, right? Things like that. With Android 6, they introduced the runtime permissions thing. So it's a little smarter with how the permissions work in Android 6. It's going to assume that a lot of applications are going to need basic permissions, right? So if your application's requesting things like internet or access network state, it's going to say, those are not accessing personal data on the phone, so just blow by it, right? Let the application have it. If you request something like contacts, it's going to make sure that the user says yes, right? So it distinguishes between those on the newer versions of Android. It's kind of cool. And those just make it, I feel like, a lot easier than when I've used iOS, which is not as much, you know. But it makes it easier to know what the application's doing, and I feel more comfortable with it. So then you see after the user's permissions there, it gets into defining the application and the activities in the application, right? So each activity is basically a screen in the application, okay? So when you start an application, if it's for example, a podcast viewer, right? You might have a search activity and a browse activity, or different things like that. So you have to define each of those there. And then getting into the part that I really like the most about Android is the intents, right, inside of the activity there. So you see where it says intent filter, and then there's the main action category launcher. If you look at the going down, is that small for people out there? Doesn't matter anyway. So this is where you're telling the operating system what my application does, right? So in this case, I have my application, this activity, the feed list activity, if you look up a little higher, has these intents, right? The main action, the category launcher, and that tells Android, this is the activity that I want you to put an icon in the launcher for, right? So there are intents that you can filter on that tell the operating system, if anywhere in your OS, someone says, I want to share text with something, you can have an intent filter on one of your activities that says, this activity knows how to receive text, right? Or this activity knows what to do when someone wants to make a phone call. And if you build those things into your activities, then you can create a dialer, right? You can create a new contact manager, anything like that. It makes it so that the OS itself is very extensible, and you can just do almost anything with it. And I love that idea that this was kind of Android's solution to the whole clipboard problem. If you remember when iOS and Android, they were all like, we need a shared clipboard between everything, whatever, right? They're like, well, just share the text, and then we know what applications in the system can handle receiving text, right? That's, I think, a really cool idea for an operating system, and I kind of wish that more operating systems did things like that. I don't know. These are some of the things. I flew through a lot of my notes just on that there, but they just kind of break it out. I should have probably gone through them and made it easier for you to see. So here's an example from an application calling an intent, right? The bottom half of that screen of that right there is saying, I want to send text to an application that knows how to receive text, that's the type of text plain, right? And so when you make that call and you start that activity, that share intent activity, then the OS knows to go through all of the other applications on your phone, searching for anything that knows how to receive that sort of intent, right? And so then it'll pop up the chooser that you've seen in Android that says, what do you want to receive this text in, unless you've already chosen one and said set as default, right? So anytime a new application comes in with an intent receiver, it will kind of do oh, I've detected a new application that can receive this type of intent. Do you want to use that as your new default, or do you want to do that? So if you've seen those, that's kind of what's going on in the back end. If you're an Android user, you've probably seen that. So the other thing that I'm sure is done in other, in iOS, or that kind of zoomed out weird, in iOS and stuff too, is the application lifecycle, right? So in Android, there are several different functions that happen in each of those activities that you define. And essentially, these are just functions, Java function. An application can hit the resume state, which basically means it's being brought to the front, right? It's about to be shown where it can act, you can do things with it, whatever. It can be paused, which means that it gets pushed in the background, but something else is in the foreground. It's still visible or, you know, partially obscured by something else, but still in memory. And when it's in that state, the Android system can decide if memory gets low enough to kill that application off. And then there's the stop state, which is the activity is just completely, it's considered not in use anymore. And if Android needs the memory at all, it can kill that application. So this is the life cycle, the activity life cycle in Android is sort of why you don't really need memory management apps in Android, like the activity killers and stuff that you see on the marketplace or whatever. They're basically just not needed because Android does a really good job of managing its memory. So then what those sort of three sections look like in the code are these 6 overridden functions in Java, right? And those are kind of just, yeah, I don't know that I really need to get into them. They're just more detailed or more granular of the 3 sections that I mentioned. And if you're overriding these in Java, you do have to call the overridden function before you do anything. Otherwise, the Android system doesn't really know what to do with it. So there's that. The last thing in Android that's sort of, I guess, different than what I've done in other OSs, it's probably quite familiar for a lot of people, is the way that they do the layout files. And a big part of this is I just didn't do a lot of GUI stuff before Android. For me, a big part of why this was different. And so this is it's an XML spec, and it's basically, they have a bunch of built-in different layout types, controls that you can call. There's text view, button, you know, things like that. And it's a lot more rigid than something like HTML, CSS type thing. And I think that is majorly in its credit, because it means that you're not getting all sorts of funky CSS hacks that make weird things happen in this way. It's a lot more, yeah, just you have a linear layout, which means you're going to have controls listed out in a linear fashion, right? Which you can see that the top one there is a vertical orientation, which means they'll just be stacked vertically. You can nest that with one that has horizontal, right? And then have your button next to your text field or however you want to do that, right? But it's just a lot more rigid in the way it does, and I like my code rigid. So, yeah, I have these slides up online if anyone wants to see them. I meant to actually put a lot more references to the the Android developer site that Google put up. They have a lot of really great information. Almost all of this is straight from there. There's one there. So. Yeah, I don't know, if you want to talk any more about that stuff, then I'd be glad to. So, it's, you know, any questions or?
Just related note, if you're into Android permissions and security, there's a security talk at WSU tomorrow at 5:30, and it's Dr. Kachi. Anyways, he has created something. I'll read this because it's tech speak. He created a approach formulated at WSU called App Miner, which relies on an association rule discovery to identify co-occurrence patterns of Android APIs and permissions.
Yeah, I worked on that.
You did?
Kind of. I had this software discourse last year, and the guy, the research guy, the graduate guy who was working on the app on it, he did a tool so that you could bring up permissions given the API. Right? So let's say you were using internet connections, right? So let's say you were using the video API, the Android video API explicitly say on its own documentation that it needs the internet or the access network state permission. But let's say you use java.net or URL, it won't say that it has it needs the internet permission. So my tool was made for Android Studio, and I made that plugin which could just go through those URL permissions and suggest you, given a certain component, which permission should you use.
Okay, cool. Cool. Which, yeah, I almost asked a question. I'll set those up here. If he had any idea what, when Ionic generates an Android app, does it generate that manifest file too and have that in there? And does it just blanket all permissions, or what does it do? It actually figures it out?
You got it.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. I was curious about that.
I'll try and post something.
Yeah, cool. I'd be interested in seeing that.
Did I say his name right?
Copy.
Coggy?
Yeah, you use that V like
Sorry.
so that
While you're answering questions and stuff.
Okay.
Oh, sure.
Coggy.
There's the button.
Thank you.
So. Okay, so for our next presentation, we're going to use a different machine, but I want to keep the same Hangout going. So just give us a second while we get that transition going. Yeah, so you should have got an email. Oops. So I'm going to present to everyone. Is it okay? So everyone's presenting. This is too much. Funny. Okay, well, I can fix it. I have it. Okay. So you can plug you in. Have HDMI?
No, I don't.
Oh,
Shoot.
don't have HDMI.
Oh, shoot.
Okay, well that's fine. So what we'll
Okay.
do.
Okay, good idea.
There you go. Okay. Everybody on the video is gonna take the full screen of this, but here's what we can do. There we go.
Awesome.
Okay, so this is going to be slightly, this might be delayed
Yeah.
from this. Is your audio working? Test. Yeah, it looks
Test,
like
test.
it. Okay. Okay.
Cool.
Everyone says Austin Crane on Swift Player.
Yep. So you're actually getting like a round robin full of different technologies. You first had Go, which is crazy new. That's awesome. And then you have Ionic, which is a web-based mobile development, which is also awesome. Android, obviously, the other side of the coin. And now you have me, which is an iOS developer. I've been making apps for 3 years or so. Are any of you guys WSU students? Nope. Okay. Dang it. Okay. So my first start at development for Apple I had never made software before, and we ended up making a bus app. Basically, it tracks the buses around campus so that students don't have to be waiting on a bus out in the cold all day for a bus to get to school. So some of my friends went and we learned iOS development, and it took about a whole summer to really figure it out. So my purpose is to hopefully show you that it doesn't take a whole summer. And the great thing about mobile development right now is that all these different technologies like web development, Go languages, all these languages are kind of merging almost, or that you can use them all in the same sort of environment. This new technology that I'm going to talk about is called Swift Playgrounds. Swift is a new open source programming language by Apple. How many of you guys have heard of it? Great, so I don't have to explain it very much. So the great thing about Playgrounds, Swift is the language. Playgrounds is the environment. Swift Playgrounds basically gives you a sandbox of ways to prototype things in Swift for mobile, for OS X, whatever you want to do. You can actually write code snippets in a playground, run it in real time, and get it compiled. So the interesting thing that I did with this particular speech is I don't have slides. Well, I do have slides, but I made it in Swift. So what I'm doing in my playground is I actually made a slide object, which has a title, a body, and an image. So excuse me if some of the layout might be a little bit off, but I did this kind of this morning. So basically, there we go. That's my slide. This is all in Swift, by the way, run in compile time. When something changes in the playground, it recompiles and renders it. So this is my first slide. So recess is in session, Swift Playgrounds and why it matters, basically. This whole new technology of being able to run things and view the result right then and there is amazing. Completely new. You used to do C++. How many C++ developers do we have here? You'd run something, it would break, and you couldn't figure out why. This gives you a way to do it in real time, figure out why it's broken, all that sort of thing, sort of stuff. So the next thing is, what is Swift and why you should care? Let's see. So Swift, since it's been open source, has made it to the web, Ubuntu. You can compile it in Ubuntu and run Swift applications. Of course, it's also an iOS programming language. So iOS, OS X, Ubuntu, and the web. That's pretty awesome. How many languages do that right now besides web languages? Go, yeah, Go now is getting them into mobile. C++, maybe. I've never heard of a C++ well-used web technology. I don't know. Maybe you guys know of one. But this is kind of big. And in the future, this is going to get bigger and bigger because it's open source. There's going to be more and more ways that you can use Swift. So when I first started development with mobile, I learned something called Objective-C. Has anybody ever seen Objective-C? Yeah. What do you guys think about that? You guys like the brackets with the enclosing sentences? And okay, well, I've been living that life for 3 years, so if that makes you feel any better. And now that you come up with Swift, what I can show you is how many of you guys seen Java? Java? So Swift has been compared to similar like Java, and we'll get into that a little bit more. JavaScript too, yeah. Yes, okay. So the great thing about programming in Playgrounds is that if you're new to programming, you can get constant results. If you're doing something wrong, you know why pretty quickly. If I was to do something like this is a function, right? Everybody sees that, and we just want to say hello. Right, then it compiles it and should show up here on the side. Okay. Say you miss a bracket. Let's see. You see right away what breaks on what line, and if you wanted to fix it, it's for say, I just want to see what happened. I have noticed it's kind of slow when you have a lot of stuff. It's kind of made more for snippets. Okay. We'll skip that. Okay, let's break it down. Let's break down some code. What do functions look like, and why they're pretty simple? So a function in Swift reads up pretty much like a sentence. How would you guys read this? You'd say, function add a, b, and give me an integer, right? Does that kind of pop out to you? When you read it in English and you're not a programmer for say, you say add a and b, spit it back out. And this arrow means return an integer. So it's way behind. Variables and constants. So one thing in programming is usually variables and constants are always in a programming language. The way you create constants, for instance, my name doesn't change. So obviously that's a constant. So you would say, let my name Austin Mark Crane. And then my eye color, well, that doesn't change. Let's make that a constant. And we'll create a blue. And my age, it varies. I get older, right? Another one is, you know, I have a girlfriend. That may vary, right? I love her very much. She's right back there. I don't think that's varying, but just for, you know, to purposes. Okay, say you just got a job at Facebook and you're gonna work on their mobile app. It's huge, got lots of parts, lots of particular modules, and then they say something like, oh, come on. This one has to come up. It's got a funny picture on it. Yeah, I guess it's true. Yes, I guess it's true. Okay. If you guys can you see this body right here? This body string? It says, in big projects, it is important to allow only tested code be implemented. Facebook's not gonna let you put stuff into their app without it being hard tested. And say they come to you and it's like, we need to add teleportation into our app. Well, here you go, make it in a playground. And then ship it to somebody, put awesome comments like the above, use Markdown to comment your code, show what they're doing. That way you can communicate what your code does in a better streamlined fashion. You don't have to generate docs, like if you're making a Rails application or anything like that. You don't have to generate any docs and serve it up on a server or anything like that. You just see it right in line. With this, some business person can see, you know, this doesn't look like code. This is just a Word document with code on the middle, but it shows what it does. You can tell your business person to see the experiment of your UI or maybe your functionality right then and there without them having to know anything about the code, and just diving into it. So that is my talk. Again, I'm Austin Crane, and follow me on Twitter at Austin M. Crane. This website, or this code, is also hosted on my GitHub. It's at Austin M. Crane, the GitHub repository, and you can this is it if you guys want to write it down. And then it's Why Swift Playgrounds. Do you guys have any questions?
Those are all the talks that we had scheduled. If